Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. This is Princess, and in this video, we will be creating a tic-tac-toe game using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you've ever played this classic game, I know that you know how exciting it can be. But if you haven't, it's okay. I'll explain to you the mechanics later on before we start coding. So let me give you a quick overview of what we will be doing. Let me start by going over the mechanics of the tic-tac-toe, especially for those who are not familiar with the game. So the tic-tac-toe game is played on a grid of 3x3 squares, forming a board. There are two players that will take turn marking empty cells with their respective symbols, usually represented by an X and an O. And then the game will begin with an empty grid. The first player will place their mark in any of the available cells. Then, same with the second player, they will also mark their place in any other cell. The goal here is to be the first one to get 3 of their marks in a row, either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. And once a player achieves this, they win the game. If all of the squares are filled and no player has 3 in a row, the game ends in a draw. So that's it. It's a very simple and strategic game that can be enjoyed by people of all ages. And now that we have a clear understanding of the game, let's start building the tic-tac-toe game. Here in our desktop, let's create a new folder and name it tic-tac-toe. This is where we will save our files. After creating our folder, let's now open our code editor. In my case, I will be using the Visual Studio Code. If you don't have a Visual Studio Code installed in your computers, we will provide the download link in the description box below, or you can use any code editor of your choice, like Sublime, Atom, Notepad++, or any other code editors available, okay? And then now that we're here, in my case, the Visual Studio Code, we will open the tic-tac-toe folder that we created a while ago. So just click this open folder, and then let's look for the tic-tac-toe folder. And then right there, we can now start coding our game. We will begin by creating the HTML file. So the HTML stands for the Hypertext Markup Language, and this is considered as the backbone of any web page. It provides the structure and content of our web pages. Then now we can start creating our HTML file. Just click this icon right here, and let's name it index.html. Let's create the basic structure, or the basic HTML structure. This one, and then the head, and then the title. Let's set the title to tic-tac-toe game. And then after the head, we have the body. And there. Just click Ctrl S to save. This title right here, this is the one that you can see at the top, or the title of the tab when you open the browser. Now we will create the selection box. This will display a select box component for the tic-tac-toe game, which allows the player to choose which role he wants to be, either the X or the O, before starting the game. Okay, we will first create the outermost div, which will serve as the main container of our tic-tac-toe selection. A div is a fundamental building block of HTML. It creates a block-level element on the web page and can be used to group any other HTML elements and create a logical division within the web page. Okay, so let's add an element of class main container. So let's add here class and then main container. We can use this class to style our select box component later on. Okay, and now inside this div main container class, we will add the content section of our web page. Let's make another div with a class name main content. There you go. A div inside another div is called a nested div. Okay, so within the main content section, we will have a div element with say a class of main prop. Okay, so this will display the text. Choose the player you want to be. So it's a prompt for the user to choose their role in the game. We will add another div element with the class name car option. So this will act as a container for the player options. We will also add here its options. Let's just save it in a button. We will add here 2 button elements. There you go. Inside the car options container. So the first button will have the class name of player X. Display the text player X. Okay. So this will represent the option for the player to choose the role of X. And similarly, second button. So this will represent the option for the player to choose the role of O. Right click and select open with live server so that we can see how it looks. Here it how it looks. This is the title that we added a while ago. Choose the player you want to be and then the 2 options which are the player X and the player O. Let's go back. Let's add a more div. Add here a class element in welcome. Let's add another div for the game title. And this will display this text, the Tic-tac-toe, which is the title of our game. We can also add another button that says play. So let's assign an ID here, play button. So this code creates a welcome screen or like a welcome screen for the Tic-tac-toe game, including the game title and a play button to start playing the game. Now we are done with the selection box and then the welcome one, and let's create a simple input field that lets the player enter their name and start the game. So let's add here another div. Say class second content. Let's just put on sec for a second. Second content. Okay. Second content or the sec content will serve as a container of the input elements. So inside the second container, we will add a heading element. So let's make another div and assign it. This will display the text, enter your name. So this will also serve as a label for the input field. After that, we will add the input field just under the second title game. So let's add input and then with the type text, have an ID, player name, input. So don't forget the backslash for the closing of your tag. And then here, as you can see, we used an ID instead of a class. Same as right here. IDs work similarly just like the class, but the only difference is that it is a unique identifier for an HTML element. Okay? Finally, let's add a button here. So with an ID element, start game. So this will trigger, or this will serve as a trigger to start the game. So let's now proceed to the next one, which is the grid or the layout of the player's board. So let's make first a div element, another div element. This will serve as the outer container for our game board. So let's make another div here for our game board. This section will represent the game board area itself. So within the game board section, we will add a div element that will display the current player's turn. So let's add a div here. And then the class player turn. Inside this player turn, we will add 2 spawn elements. So a spawn is used to group inline elements, which means that they will flow within the surrounding text and will not start on a new line. This first span will have an ID of a player name there, and then the second one will have an ID of opponent and then play. So there. Let's set the opponent name to computer as default. Okay, and then this player name, as you can see, we did not set anything here because we want it to be dynamic. So the content of this span or the first span will be dynamically updated with the player's name during the game. Similarly, the second span has an ID of opponent name and will represent the name of the opponent. So in this case, the opponent's name is computer. So the opponent is not dynamic and will remain constant throughout the game. Additionally, we can add a slider here to represent as a visual indicator, such as a slider. This is to highlight the active player or to show which player's turn it is. So moving on, after the div with the class name of a game board, we will have another div element with the class name of grid area. Okay, so this section will represent the playable area or the grid area of the game where the game tiles are placed. So a while ago, we mentioned that the Tic-tac-toe game is played on a 3x3, right? So inside this grid area container, we will make the 3 sections to represent the 3 rows in our grid. So let's just copy this. So in each section, let's put 3 span elements with the class name of tile. There you go. Let's just copy this one and then change this to 2 and then this one to 3. Let's do the same for the next 2 sections. Change this to 4, 5, and 6. And then last one. So there you go. This span elements will represent the individual tiles or cells within the grid. So each span element can be used to display game-related content or interact with the user later on. Okay. So there, we are done with the structure of our grid area. Oh wait, let's go back here to set content and add a placeholder for the input field that says your name, or to make it more appealing to users, right? Okay. Lastly, for our HTML, so let's make a div with the class game result. Game so there. So this element will represent the result section of the game. And inside this game result, we will have 2 child elements. So the first one is another div with the class name of winner name. So this will be used to display the name of the winner of the game. And then the second child is another div with the class play again, but inside the div, let's add a button element with the text play again. Okay, and this play again button will allow the user or the player to start a new game after seeing the result. And then click Ctrl S to save. Okay, so now let's take a look how it is displayed in our browser. So right click and then choose Open with Live Server. So the Open with Live Server, this is basically a live server. So any changes that you made in your file will automatically display here in our page. This is how it is displayed in our browser. It looks like it doesn't make sense, right? It looks kind of messy and blurred. To make it more visually appealing and to make it look like that it's really put together, it's time to add our CSS. So the CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. This is basically used to design and customize the appearance of web pages. This is where we can apply some styling to our game board, make it more appealing, and enhance the user experience. So let's now start to add some style to our Tic-tac-toe game. Okay, so let's navigate here at the leftmost corner of our VS Code and click this one, the first icon right here that says New File, just beside your folder name. Let's name this file style.css. So remember to put the .css as its extension because it is a requirement for any external CSS files. Then to link this to our HTML file, let's go back first to our HTML file. Go here inside the head section at the top under the title. Let's add this link to link our CSS external file to our HTML file, and then Ctrl S to save. Then there you go. Let me just erase this and then go back to style.css. Okay. What I will do first here is I will import some fonts that I want to incorporate my game with. So you can also choose your own fonts and import it in your HTML or CSS files. So you can just visit the Google Fonts through this link, fonts.google.com. This is where I got mine. So once you're here, you can choose the fonts you wish to use in your page and then follow the instructions to import or link them to your HTML files. Okay? And now going back, let me add this. Set the margin to 0, padding 0, and then box sizing, border box. Okay, so this asterisk right here means that all the CSS properties will be applied to all the elements on the page. So let's add some style to the body. Here, I want to add a background. Let's say a green one. I want this green, and then let me add a radial gradient background. There. If you want to add this, I used the CSS gradient.io. This is where I generated my gradient background. So you can also visit this link and play around the colors and then use it in your pages. Okay. And then I want to use the font family to be Poppins. So this is also from the Google fonts that I imported a while ago. Okay. Now let's add some style to our welcome section. So let's have a CSS selector called welcome. So if you guys want to target an HTML element that is a class, you usually have to start with a dot, then followed by the class name. So here, we targeted the welcome class. So let's add a position. Let's add a position. Absolute. Set it to absolute to allow us to position the element freely within its parent container. And then we want to center the element horizontally and vertically within the parent container. So let's set the top 50%, left 50%. So let's combine it with a transform property. Say translate 50%, 50%. There you go. So to further adjust the position of the element, ensuring it is perfectly centered, we use the top and the left properties combined with the transform property. Let's have a transition property on 0.3. There. So this property applies a smooth transition effect to all CSS properties with a duration of 0.3 seconds and an ease timing function. So let's add some styling to the border, say 2 pixels, dashed. And for the color, I want it to be brown. There. And then let's change its background color. Background color. And then let's add some padding. And then last, let's add a border radius of 10%. So I think this is all good. Now let's add some style to the game title. So since it is a class, let's start with a dot followed by the class name. So let's set the font family to Bungie. So also imported this from Google Fonts. And then let's set the font size to 50 pixels. The color, say, what do you call that? The burly wood. And then let's add a text shadow, 4 pixels. And then let's add a WebKit text. There, 1 pixel back. So what we did here is we applied a text shadow effect to create a shadow behind the text, and then the WebKit text stroke property to add a thin black stroke around the text. Okay, and then the last element that we have here inside the welcome div, I think, is the play button. So let's target that element with the ID play button. And now since we are targeting an ID, instead of a dot, we will use a hash followed by the unique identifier. Say play button. So let's define some properties. Let me just double check this if I got it right. Let me just copy this to be sure. Okay. So let's define some properties like the background. Say I want it to be pale brown, and then the color, say white, and then let's display it, please. Margin auto, line content center. Then let's set the padding to 10 pixels and 20 pixels. Let's set the topics as its font family, and then for the font size, let's have it 18. Font weight. Then let's align the text to center. Let's remove the border. Let's add a border radius. 5 pixel. Okay, let's define the cursor, a pointer. And then let's add that transition that we did a while ago. 0.3 needs. Okay, and then there, let's add a hover pseudo class. So let me just copy this and then add hover. Let's give it a subtle hover effect. So let's change it to this color, and then let's also scale it. Scale 1. So let's check. Okay, so there we can see the change in the background color whenever we hover the button. Let's try scaling it to 1.2. I think that's too big. Let's go back to 1. Okay. Now we're done here. Let's style the second div of the class, named as the class main container. So let's copy this, start with a dot, and then the class name. So there. So the main container is where the user chooses which character he wants to be. So again, let's define some CSS properties, and then let's set its border to 2 pixel dark. Pixels and 50 pixels. Oop, let's make this 55. So since it is overlapping, let's add a main container.height CSS property here. So opacity. Here. For now, you can't really see the effects, but we can see this as we go along later on. Okay, and now let's style the main prompt. See the font size is 25. And then for the margin, let's have it with 0. And the font family for the pins. Now let's add some style to the character options. car. So let's set the display to flex to allow us to create a flexible layout for the character options. Oh, I'm sorry, flex. And then the width property 100% to ensure that the character options span the full width of the container. Okay, now let's add some style to the character options button. Set the width to 100%, margin. Distance. Align it to center. Set the padding. And then the font size, say 18 pixels. Plate 500. Then let's remove the border. Let's add some border radius in 5 pixels. And then first. Next, we will have two CSS selectors to target the specific buttons for each player button. The player X and then the player O buttons on hover. So let's have here card options, last name of the player X, which is the PL -X, and then hover. So I want its background color to be pink, and then transport. For anything gigabyte. Okay. And then for the player O, let's just copy this one. Let's change the background color to this one. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to change this. PLO. So there. Now, let's style the section where the player enters its name. Content. So let's add some CSS properties to our second content section. Okay, now we're done with adding some styles to our second content. As you can see, whenever we make changes or add something here in our CSS file, our live server automatically changes and displays whatever the change that we made here in our files. Okay, let's set or define the properties that style the title or the label of the form. So let's set title. For the font size, small, say 20. Okay, better. Okay, now we'll define the CSS properties to style the text input field within this section content. So we have second content and then the input. Let's set the width to 100% to make the input field span the entire width available within its container. Adding. Okay, now we are done with the input field. Now let's style the placeholder or the text you see here in the input field before the user enters its name. So let's set content and then the placeholder. Oh, I forgot to put here input and placeholder. Okay, so with let's set its font family to pop-ins. So there you go. So if you enter your name here, your font family is, or the style of the input field is different from the placeholder. There. Okay. Lastly, let's define the style for the button right here, the start game button within the section content. So second content button. Let's say I want to change its background color to green. Then let's also add a hover effect for the button using the hover. So we just copy this, paste here, and add hover. So this is the hover pseudo class. Whenever hovered over the background color of this button, I want to change to, say, to a much darker green. There you go. And let's scale it slightly. Let's slightly scale it. So there. Now let's go to the game board. So we have the second container as its main container. Let's add some CSS properties right here. Let's also add here the second container.show that we will use later on. Since as you've noticed, they are all overlapping each other and we don't want that. Okay, now let's add some style to our game board. Game board. Set the padding to 7 pixels. Now for the player turn. Now for the two span elements inside the player turn. Add some style there. Now for the children of the player turns. Player turn. Yep. Hunt. Let's copy this. Change this to last child. Where now let's design the slider. Now let's add other CSS properties that are related to the slider. Design the grid area. This one is the individual tiles. So let's style those individual tiles that of our grid area. Now let's style the game result, which displays the result of the game, or who won the game. I think I want to add this font family here in the grid. Okay. I think this is the last element that we can add as our tool. We can just add later on if we have to modify some of these styles. Okay, and there you go. We are done with our CSS code, and this is how it looks like now. Oh, I wonder why it's not showing the grid. Let me check here in index. Oh, now I see. I wrote sections instead of sections. Sorry for that. Let's just remove the extra S here. So there, then save. So there we go. This is how it looks like now. Later on, we will modify our code to not make these sections or divs overlap each other, okay? And we will do that in our JavaScript. The JS or the JavaScript is a programming language that we can use to create dynamic and interactive web pages. It can be used to add animations, pop-ups, and other interactive features to your web page or web apps. Now, let's make our JavaScript code to bring our Tic-tac-toe game to life. We'll start by creating our JavaScript file. So let me just maximize my VS Code first and open the Explorer. So let's create our JavaScript file. Let's name it script.js. So the .js is the extension required for any JavaScript files. We will use our JS code to handle player clicks, switch turns, check for a winner after each move, and display the results. So don't forget also to link this to your HTML file. Just put here at the bottom of the body of so there. Click Ctrl S to save. And then let's go back to our JS file. Let's first select all the required elements from the HTML document using the CSS selectors. So here, we start by selecting the main container element from the HTML document and storing it in the main container variable. So the query selector method returns the first element that matches the specified selector. In this case, it looks for an element with the class main container and assign it to the main container variable. And then we continue by selecting the character options for the player X and the player O. Here, we use the query selector method again, but this time we call it on the main container element. So by changing the method calls, we can select elements that are descendants of the main container. Next, we select the secondary container element. So the secondary container element is separate from the main container. Similar to before, we use the query selector to select an element with the class sec_container from the entire document. Okay, and then we select the element displaying the current player's turn, which is this one. Then we select all the span elements within the sections of the game board. So here, the query selector all method is used instead of a query selector. It returns a collection of all elements that match the specified selector. In this case, we are selecting all the span elements within the section element. We also select the element displaying the game result and the winner's name within it. Additionally, we notice how we call the query selector on the game result element itself to select the nested winner name element. Okay. Next, we select the play again button within the game result. Again, we use the query selector on the game result element to select the button element within it. Okay, now moving on, we select the welcome section, the player name display element, and then the second content element. So these are straightforward uses of query selector and get element by ID to select the elements based on a class or ID. Lastly, the player name input. here we use the getElementById to select the element with the ID player name input. Now, let's make a Windows onload event. So this code block will run or execute once the window finishes loading. So we'll be using a loop to add a click event to each available span element. So here, we will loop through each span element stored in the sex_span collection using a for loop. The setAttribute method allows us to add or modify attributes of an HTML element. In this case, we will add an onClick attribute to each span. So the this keyword refers to the current element being clicked, which will be passed as an argument to the clickBox function. Now let's add event listeners to the character select buttons. Let's start with the character X is selected. Now let's proceed when the character O is selected. You know what, let me just copy this one. And then change this O. Add in character. Here, this is triggered when the player X option is selected. We hid the main container and showed or displayed the secondary content. This line, we set the player name and indicate that it's the player X's turn. While this right here, the car select O that onClick is triggered when the player O option is clicked. Similarly, we hid the main container and display the second content. And then we add active and player classes to the player turn element. Lastly, we set the player name to player O. So both of these event handlers hide the main container, showed the secondary content, and updated the player name accordingly. Now, let's add a click event listener to the play button. There. So this event listener is triggered when the play button is clicked. It hides the welcome section and displays the main container, secondary container, and the secondary content, or the sec content and the sec container. Now let's add an event listener for the start game button. So the Start Game button event listener is triggered when the Start Game button is clicked. It gets the player's name from the input field, sets the player's name based on the input and the active player X or O, and toggles the visibility of the set content and the set container. So this gets the value of the player name input field. And then here, this is where we set the player's name based on the input and the current player's turn, if it is X or O. And then this one, we removed the show class from the secondary content or the set content, and basically hid the set content and then showed or displayed the set container. So there. Now, given this code, let's go back to our CSS file and do a little modification in our code. So let us go to the second. Let me move this to here. And then add. And then done. What we did is modified some of our CSS styles to match our JavaScript code. Okay, so moving on, let's go back to our JS file and define some game-related variables. So this code block initializes some variables that were used in the game, such as player icons, current player sign, bot status, and the default player sign value. Now let's define the clickbox function that we encountered or we mentioned a while ago. This user click function or the function clickbox is responsible for handling the user's click on a tile in the keyboard. So let's add an if here. We copy this one and change this to X. So here, if it's the player's turn as player O, it updates the player sign and the player sign value variables accordingly. It also sets the inner HTML of the click box or the click tile to the player O icon and removes the active class from the player turn element. This one right here, this displays the O icon in the click tile or click cell. This one removes the active class from the player turn element. And then this sets the ID attribute of the box to the player sign. If it's not the player's turn, or as player X, it updates the inner HTML of the click box to the player X icon, adds the active class to the player turn element. Okay? So this displays the X icon in the click box or the click tile or the click cell, whatever you want to call it. And then this sets the ID attribute of the box to the player's side. Lastly, the player turn class list.add adds the active class to the player turn element. So after each move, it will call the select winner function to check if there is a winner after the player's moves. So select winner function. Let's temporarily disable the click events on the click element and the section container to prevent multiple clicks during the bot's turn or the computer's turn. Let's also add here a random time delay. Okay, so what we added here is this one disables the click events for the click box or the click tile, and this one disables the click event for the entire game board. So the function will generate a time delay using math.random and set timeout before calling the bot function to make the bots move. So here, we generate a random time delay before the bot makes its move. This code basically defines the clickbox function, which is called when a span is clicked by a player. It handles the logic of updating the game state, switching player turns, checking for a winner, and triggering the computer's turn. Okay, now speaking of the bot or the computer, the next function will be the function bot. So let's start with an array. We created an array to store the available tile indices on the game board, and we can now check if the computer is allowed to play. Now we will iterate through each cell element to find available tile. Let's use a for loop. So what we did here is we iterate through each span or through each tile element to find available tiles or cells. So here we check if the tile is empty, meaning it doesn't have any child elements, and then we added the index of the empty tile to the array. So basically this code uses a for loop to loop through each box element of the game board and checks if the box is empty by verifying if it doesn't have any child elements. If a box is empty, it adds its index to the array. Okay? Then let's now randomly select an index from an array of available tiles using the math.random. So random box. Let's copy the player X icon. Boom here. Okay, so what we did here is we want to randomly select an index from the array of available tiles using the math.random and the math.floor. So we will check if there are available tiles to select. If there are available boxes to select, meaning the array is not empty, we will determine the player sign for the bot or the computer based on the current turn. So let's set the appropriate icon based on the player sign, which is right here is X. And then similarly, we set the appropriate icon based on the player sign. And in this case, it's O. So after the computer's move or the bot's move, it calls the select winner function to check if there is a winner or a draw in the game. It disables click events on the selected tile to prevent further interaction and enables the click events on the section or on the set container for the next turn. Here, we also reset the player sign to X for the next turn. So basically, this code defines the bot function, which is responsible for the bot's turn in the game or the computer's turn in the game. So it selects a random available tile and updates the game state accordingly. Now, let's define our helper functions for checking the sign of the specific tile positions or box positions. We first have the function getIDVal. And then the second one is function checkIDSign. Okay, now we did our two helper functions. So the first one is the function getIDVal. This gets the ID value of this specific class. So we select the element with a specified class and retrieves its ID. It takes the parameter class name, which represents the class name of the element. The function also uses the documented query selector. This is to select the element with a specified class, appending it with a class name. It then retrieves the ID of the selected element using the .id property. Finally, it will return the ID value. And then the next one is the function to check if three IDs have the same sign. So here we check if the IDs of the specified elements have the given sign, and then we'll return if all three IDs match the sign. So it takes four parameters, the val 1, 2, 3, and the sign. Inside the function, it calls the getIDVal function to retrieve the ID values for the val 1, 2, and 3. It then compares these values or these ID values with a given sign. If all three ID values match the sign, it returns true, indicating that there is a match. If the comparison is false, it returns false, indicating that there is no match. So these functions are used within the select winner function to check for winning combinations on the game board. So by retrieving the IDs of specific elements and comparing them with a player sign, the checkIDSign function helps determine if a player has won the game. Okay, so since we've mentioned the select winner, let's go ahead and have a look into it and define its property. Select winner. So let's check for the winning combinations or if there's a draw in the game. First, we will check all possible winning combinations by calling the checkIDSign functions, passing in the appropriate IDs and the player sign variable. So if any of the winning combinations match, it will execute this code right here, which is false. Okay, now, if a winning combination is found here, the runBot variable is set to false to stop the bot or the computer from making any further moves. The bot function is called to let the computer or the bot make its final move, and then we will show the game results after a short delay. Okay, and then to check who won the game and to display the result, we have here an if-else statement. So if the current player won, it will display their name as the winner. But if the computer or the bot won, it will display the message computer has won. So if no winning combination is found, we will check for a draw. So the function also checks if all the positions on the game board are filled. If all the tiles are filled and no winner is found, it will disable the bot or the computer from making any moves. We'll call the bot function to let the computer or the bot to make its final move, and then display a message indicating that the game ended in a draw is displayed. This will display the message indicating that the game ended in a draw. Okay, so this code basically is a select winner function. It will check if a player has won or if the game has resulted in a draw. It also disables the computer or the bot and displays the game result accordingly. The function also updates the winner's name in the result message. Okay, lastly, we have the play again button. So we added an event listener to the play again button. When the button is clicked, the code inside this arrow function will be executed. So this will reset the game by reloading the page. The purpose of this code is to reload the entire page using the window.location reload. Reloading the page effectively restarts the game by resetting all variables and returning to the initial state. This will also allow the player to start a new game after finishing the current one. And then there. And there you go. We have completed the coding part. So let's see the output of our tic-tac-toe game. You might have missed something. Let's see. Click play. Oh, why is it not displaying the result? I think I have missed something here. And the winner. Oh, there's my win name. I forgot to put the winning. So I want the cherry bomb to be its front. One size is bit. This is good. I think I have to enter it. Copy this one. Pumpkin, why are you there? There, we forgot to put the background and the position absolute. Okay, so it displayed that I won the game. Let's make it center. Okay, there you go. Okay, so let's refresh the page and see the output. Double check our output. As you can see, this is the welcome section. Yes, this is the welcome div. This is the game title, and we have the play button right here for us to play the game. And this one right here is the main container. This is where you will choose your preferred character. I want to be the player X, so I will choose X. And then this one is the set content. This is where will prompt you to enter your name. So I will enter Princess. And then we have the start game button right here to start the game. Anyway, you've also noticed that the different divs are not overlapping like before. And that is here in our JavaScript code. Okay, so let's jump into a quick game to test our implementation. I'll take the first turn as player X, and then the opponent's turn will be the player O. So watch closely as the game board updates after each move, and then the game will continue until one of the players achieves a winning combination or until the game ends in a draw. So let's see who comes out as the winner. Start game. Clicks right here. So there, I won the game. Let's try making it draw. Princess. So there, the match has been drawn. So the result is now displayed on the screen. If the game ends in a draw, it also recognizes the tie and display this appropriate message, the match has been drawn. And there you have it. We have successfully created the classic tic-tac-toe game using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.